The billionaire married the brave houseboy. This is the story about Ifeoma, a billionaire lady in Lagos, who has everything but is very lonely, and Chidi, her kind houseboy.
Once upon a time, in the big busy city of Lagos, there lived a very rich lady named Ifeoma, who had more money than anyone could ever count in a whole lifetime. Ifeoma lived in a house that was so big it looked like a shining white castle with gold on the windows, and she had many cars that were shiny and red and blue. But even though she had all these beautiful things, her heart felt a little bit lonely because she spent all her time talking to mean people in suits who only cared about numbers and business. Every morning, Ifeoma would wake up in her soft silk bed and look out at her giant garden, which was full of bright flowers and tall palm trees that swayed in the wind. And that was where she first saw a young man named Chidi, who had just started working as the houseboy to help clean the floors and water the plants. Chidi was not rich like Ifeoma, and he wore simple clothes that were clean but old. Yet he always had a very big smile on his face, and he would sing sweet songs to the birds while he walked under the hot sun. Ifeoma would stand behind her glass window watching him because she wondered how someone who had so little could be so happy while she had everything, but felt like she was missing something important. One day, the sun was shining very brightly, and it was very hot outside, so Ifeoma decided to walk out into the garden to get some fresh air and see the flowers up close. As she walked down the stone path, she saw Chidi kneeling on the ground near some pink hibiscus flowers, and he was talking to a little butterfly that had landed on his hand, as if the butterfly was his best friend in the whole world. When Chidi heard Ifeoma's expensive shoes clicking on the ground, he stood up very quickly and bowed his head because he knew she was the big boss of the house. But Ifeoma told him not to be afraid and asked him why he was always singing so happily. Chidi looked into her eyes with a very kind look and told her that even though he did not have gold or fast cars, he had the sunshine and the music in his heart and the beauty of the trees to make him feel like a king. Ifeoma felt a strange fluttering in her chest that she had never felt before because no one had ever spoken to her with such honesty and sweetness without wanting her money. They stood there in the garden for a long time, just talking about simple things like the rain and the colors of the sky. And for the first time in many years, the billionaire woman forgot all about her meetings and her many millions of naira. She looked at Chidi's strong hands and his gentle face and realized that he was much more special than any of the rich men she knew, who only talked about buying big buildings. Just as she was about to ask him more about his family and where he came from, a loud noise came from the front of the house as her big black gate swung open, and her grumpy manager ran out holding a telephone, shouting that there was a very big problem at her office that she had to fix right away. Ifeoma sighed deeply because she did not want to leave the peaceful garden or the kind words of Chidi. But she had to be the strong boss lady that everyone expected her to be. So she walked away from the flowers and followed her grumpy manager back inside the giant white house. All through the long afternoon, Ifeoma sat in her cold office with the air conditioner blowing loudly, while she looked at papers and talked to angry men on the phone. But her mind kept drifting back to the window, where she could see Chidi moving gracefully across the grass as he carried heavy buckets of water without even complaining once. When the sun began to set and turn the Lagos sky into a beautiful painting of orange and purple, a very scary thing happened, because a group of bad men who wanted to steal Ifeoma's money climbed over the high walls of the estate and started shouting and breaking things. All the expensive security guards with their fancy uniforms and loud radios got very scared and ran away to hide, because they did not expect anyone to actually jump over the fence, leaving Ifeoma all alone inside the big house, while the bad men tried to kick down the heavy wooden front door. Ifeoma hid behind her big desk with her heart thumping like a drum, feeling very small and frightened despite all her billions, until suddenly she heard a very loud shout from outside that didn't sound like a bad man at all. It was Chidi, the houseboy, who had been resting in his small room at the back when he heard the trouble and ran out with nothing but a long wooden broom and a heart full of bravery to protect the woman who had been kind to him in the garden. Chidi did not have a gun or a shield, but he stood in front of the big door and shouted so loudly and looked so strong that the bad men thought he was a secret giant soldier, and he chased them all the way back to the fence until they scrambled over it and ran away into the dark night. Ifeoma opened her door with shaking hands and saw Chidi standing there, catching his breath while his shirt was a little bit torn, and instead of asking for a reward or money, he only asked if she was okay and if she needed a glass of cool water to calm her heart. She looked at him and realized that all her money could not buy the kind of courage Chidi had just shown, and she felt a very deep warmth inside her, because she knew that this simple houseboy cared more about her life than all the rich people in the city combined. She reached out and touched his arm to make sure he wasn't hurt, and for a moment, the billionaire lady and the houseboy just stood in the quiet hallway together while the moon started to shine through the windows. Ifeoma knew right then that she could not let Chidi just be a servant anymore, because he was the only person who had ever truly stood up for her when things were scary. As she was thanking him and looking into his brave eyes, her telephone started ringing again with a call from her a strict uncle, who told her that she must get married to a rich prince very soon, or she would lose her whole company. Ifeoma felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she listened to her uncle's harsh voice on the phone, because he was telling her that the rules of her big company meant she had to have a husband by her side, or the other greedy directors would take all her power away. She looked at Chidi, who was still standing there in the moonlight with his torn shirt and his honest face, and she realized that she did not want to marry a mean rich prince who would only try to control her and spend her money on silly things. A very bold and crazy idea started to grow in her mind like a seed, and even though it felt like a dream, she knew it was the only way to save her company and keep the one person who actually made her feel safe and happy. She took a deep breath and asked Chidi to follow her into the big golden living room, where she sat him down on a soft velvet sofa that was probably worth more than a whole village, and she told him everything about the trouble her uncle was causing. Chidi listened very quietly with his big, gentle eyes. And then Ifeoma took a very big leap and asked him if he would be willing to marry her so that they could stop the mean people from taking her business away. Chidi looked very surprised, and his eyes went wide, because he was just a simple boy from a small town who came to the city to work, and he told Ifeoma that he didn't have any fine clothes or a big name to give her in front of the world. But Ifeoma grabbed his hands and told him that his brave heart and his kind soul were worth more than all the diamonds in Lagos, and she promised that she would take care of him and his family forever if he would just stand by her side as her husband. Chidi thought about it for a long time while the giant clock on the wall went tick-tock, and then he looked at Ifeoma and said he would do it, but not for the money or the big house, but because he saw that she was a lonely girl behind all those billions, and he wanted to make sure she was never scared again. He made her promise one very important thing, which was that they must keep the secret that he used to be her houseboy, because if the mean directors found out, they would laugh at them and try to break them apart. Ifeoma agreed immediately and felt a huge weight lift off her shoulders. So she called her uncle back and told him with a very strong voice that she had already found the perfect man and that they would be getting married very soon in a giant celebration. She spent the rest of the night teaching Chidi how to walk and talk like a very important man, and she ordered the best tailors in the whole country to come to the house at sunrise to make him suits out of the finest silk and wool. As the morning light began to peek through the curtains, Ifeoma looked at Chidi and saw him transforming from a helper into a king. But she saw that he still had that same sweet smile that made her heart feel warm like cocoa. They knew that the next day would be very hard because they would have to face all the cameras and the prying eyes of the high society people at a very big party. Ifeoma held Chidi's hand tightly and told him to be ready because they were about to walk out of the front door and tell the whole world a story that would change their lives forever. The very next day, the big white house was buzzing like a beehive because it was the day of the grand gala where Ifeoma had to show Chidi to all the rich and powerful people of Lagos. Chidi came out of his room wearing a suit that was as black as the night sky and a shirt as white as a cloud, and he looked so handsome and tall that Ifeoma's breath almost went away for a second. She took his arm and whispered in his ear that he should just keep smiling and remember that he was the bravest man she had ever met, even if he didn't know which fork to use for the fancy.
Cake. When they arrived at the party, hundreds of cameras started flashing like tiny stars, and all the mean directors and the nosy aunties leaned in to see who this mysterious man was. Chidi did not shake or look at the ground. Instead, he held Ifeoma's hand firmly and spoke with a voice that was as smooth as honey and as strong as a lion. He told the people about the beauty of the land and the importance of being kind, and everyone was so amazed by his wisdom that they forgot to ask which school he went to or how much money his father had. Even Ifeoma's strict uncle walked up to them with a confused look on his face, trying to find a reason to be grumpy. But Chidi greeted him with so much respect and such a big, honest smile that the uncle had to shake his hand and admit that Ifeoma had chosen a very impressive man. For the first time in her life,
Ifeoma didn't feel like she was standing alone against the world because she had a partner who was like a solid rock by her side. They danced together under the giant sparkling chandeliers, and as they twirled around the room, Ifeoma felt like the luckiest woman in the world, not because of her billions, but because the man holding her was truly her best friend. But just as the music was playing a beautiful song and everyone was clapping for the happy couple, a jealous man who used to want to marry Ifeoma for her money was lurking in the shadows with a very mean plan. This jealous man had been snooping around the back of the estate earlier that morning and had found Chidi's old torn work shirt hidden in a bin, and he was waiting for the perfect moment to jump onto the stage and tell everyone the big secret. The mean and jealous man, whose name was Chief Okeke, stepped onto the bright stage with a wicked grin on his face and held up Chidi's old torn work shirt for everyone to see. The music stopped suddenly and the whole room became as quiet as a graveyard because Chief Okeke started shouting that Chidi was nothing but a common houseboy who used to scrub the floors of the very house he now lived in as a master. All the rich people began to whisper and point their fingers, and Ifeoma's strict uncle looked like he was about to explode with anger because he felt that a houseboy was not good enough to be part of their fancy family. Chidi felt a very heavy sadness in his chest, and his face turned a little bit red because he didn't like that his secret was being shouted out like a bad thing. And for a moment, he thought about running away back to his small village. But before he could take a single step, Ifeoma did something that surprised everyone in the giant hall. She walked right up to the center of the stage and took the old torn shirt from Chief Okeke's hands. She didn't look ashamed or sad, but instead she held the shirt up high and told everyone that this piece of cloth was a symbol of the hardest working and most honest man she had ever met in her life. She told the crowd that while they were all busy chasing money and being mean to others, Chidi was the one who had saved her life from bad men and the only one who loved her for who she was, not for her bank account. Ifeoma looked her uncle and all the directors in the eye and said that if they could not respect the man she loved just because he started with nothing, then they could take their business and their money and leave her house forever. The room stayed silent for a long time until finally one of the oldest and wisest grandmothers in the room started to clap her hands, and soon everyone else joined in because they realized that Ifeoma was right and that Chidi's heart was worth more than 1,000 business deals. Chief Okeke was so embarrassed that his mean plan had failed that he tucked his tail between his legs and sneaked out of the back door while everyone cheered for the couple. Even though they had won the battle at the party, Chidi felt that he needed to show the world that he could build something of his own. So he told Ifeoma that he wanted to go away for a little while to work on a big farm project to help feed the poor people of the city. Ifeoma was sad to see him go, but she understood that her king needed to find his own path, so she kissed him goodbye and promised to wait for him while he went to turn his dreams into reality. Many months passed by and the big house felt very quiet without Chidi singing. But Ifeoma stayed busy using her billions to build schools and hospitals because Chidi had taught her that the best thing to do with money is to help other people. One sunny morning, a long line of trucks filled with bags of rice, golden corn, and fresh green vegetables drove into the city, and everyone was talking about a wonderful new farm that was growing enough food to make sure no child in Lagos would ever go hungry again. Ifeoma went down to the farm to see this miracle for herself, and when she arrived, she saw a man standing in the middle of a beautiful green field with the sun shining on his face and a very proud smile on his lips. It was Chidi, but he did not look like a houseboy anymore, and he did not even look like the man in the fancy suit. He looked like a great leader who had used his own hands and his clever mind to build an empire of food for his people. When he saw Ifeoma, he ran to her and picked her up in a giant hug, telling her that he had worked hard every single day so that he could stand before her not just as a husband, but as a man who had brought something beautiful into the world just like she had. Ifeoma cried tears of joy because she saw that their love had grown even bigger than her bank account, and she realized that they were finally a perfect team, where the billionaire woman and the farm king were exactly equal in everything they did. They went back to the big white house together and opened the gates wide so that all the neighbors and the workers could come in for a giant feast made from the food Chidi had grown. Her strict uncle and all the directors came too, and this time they didn't look at Chidi's past, but instead they bowed their heads in respect because they saw that a person's beginning does not limit how high they can fly if they have love and hard work in their soul. Ifeoma and Chidi lived happily ever after in their big house, but they never forgot the garden where they first met, and every morning they would go out together to water the flowers and sing sweet songs to the birds, reminding everyone in the whole city of Lagos that the most expensive thing in the world is a heart that knows how to love truly.
The story of Ifeoma and the Kidi ends by showing us that love is the greatest power of all.